Picture this. A woman sits tied to a chair while a Nazi officer slides a needle under her fingernail. But here's the crazy part. She's not the victim in this room. She's the weapon. Her name is Violette Szabo, and while this Nazi thinks he's getting secrets out of her, she's actually doing math in her head. She's calculating artillery positions, radio frequencies, and the exact timing needed to coordinate 50,000 resistance fighters across an entire continent. Every scream is buying time. Every drop of blood is an investment. Because in exactly 4 hours and 37 minutes, those 50,000 fighters will get a radio signal that sounds like poetry, but will trigger the most amazing act of coordinated warfare in human history. And Violette's torture? That's the price of keeping the secret safe. But here's what's going to blow your mind. This isn't just a story about heroes and villains. It's about something way more dangerous. It's about what happens when regular people discover they're not regular at all. You think you know about D-Day? You don't know anything. The real invasion didn't start on the beaches. It started 4 years earlier, in the minds of people who looked completely ordinary, but were absolutely not. This is how housewives became bomb experts, how teenagers became master saboteurs, how a blind 9-year-old became a spy, how France's most unlikely citizens built a shadow army that helped defeat Nazi Germany using nothing but bicycles, radios, and the kind of smart thinking that would make rocket scientists jealous. New Year's Eve, 1943. 4 British soldiers crawl out of the freezing English Channel onto what will become the most famous beach in military history. They're breaking every rule of warfare, every assumption about what's possible. They're not here to fight. They're here to taste sand. And that sand is about to reveal a secret that will save thousands of lives. Captain Scott Bowden fills canvas bags with sand samples, but this isn't some school science project. Every single grain matters, because every grain will decide whether 30-ton tanks roll onto Omaha Beach or sink into it like giant metal tombstones. Back in London, Dr. John Bernal will study these samples with equipment that would impress modern labs. He discovers something incredible. Omaha Beach's sand has 23% crushed seashells that create natural cement when they get wet, but only at exactly the right wetness. Too wet, and it's like quicksand that'll swallow tanks whole. Too dry, and it's like concrete that'll destroy landing boats on impact. The invasion window isn't days or hours. It's minutes. Minutes decided by the tiny shells of sea creatures that died millions of years ago. Think about that craziness. The fate of democracy depends on ancient dead shellfish. But here's where it gets completely insane. As Scott Bowden collects the samples that will decide Europe's fate, he's being watched by a German guard who makes a decision that costs his country the war. Private Klaus Richter sees the figures on the beach through his night scope. Military rules are crystal clear. Report immediately. Sound the alarm. Wake everyone up. Capture the guys. But Richter has a problem. He's been drinking alcohol to stay warm, which will get him shipped to the Russian front if anyone finds out. He's got seconds to decide. Expose the spies and face punishment for drinking, or pretend they're just seabirds and hope nobody asks questions. He chooses to save his own skin. One drunk guard's moment of cowardice opens the door to D-Day. The most important spy mission of the war works because a German soldier cared more about not getting in trouble than protecting his position. That's the first lesson. Your enemy's biggest weakness isn't their weapons. It's that they're human, and humans always make mistakes. 600 miles away, in a basement in France, Guillaume Mercade is building a war machine, not made of steel and gunpowder, but of intelligence and precision. And it's about to prove more deadly than any tank. Guillaume's cover story is perfect. He used to be a professional bike racer, and now he fixes bicycles. His racing license lets him ride thousands of miles through Nazi-occupied territory. To German patrols, he's just a local guy staying in shape. To Allied spies, he's the most valuable person in all of Europe. But Guillaume isn't just drawing maps. He's doing something that would blow your mind. He's learned to see through concrete walls using sound. Here's the incredible part. Guillaume taught himself to X-ray Nazi bunkers with his ears. Different types of concrete make different sounds when they're drying. He can tell from half a mile away whether a bunker is made with proper concrete or cheap wartime stuff mixed with sand, sawdust, and hope. The Germans think they're building an unbreakable wall along the coast. They're actually building their own death certificates, and Guillaume is writing them in a code based on bicycle repair. His spy reports read like bike repair manuals. Gears need fixing means the gun sizes don't match what headquarters thinks. Tire pressure low in Section 7 means the concrete is too thin. Chain needs immediate work means the ammunition storage can be blown up easily. To German guards, who sometimes stop him, Guillaume is just talking shop with fellow bike lovers. To Allied commanders reading his reports in London, he's giving them targeting information accurate to the foot. But Guillaume's real genius isn't what he sees. It's what he figures out. German gun positions follow standard designs from Hitler's construction manual. Guillaume studies these patterns like a detective analyzing clues. By measuring the outside and counting air vents, he can guess the inside layout, how much ammo they have, how many soldiers, and where the weak spots are. Each bunker needs specific concrete mixes for maximum strength. Too little cement and Allied shells go right through. Too much, and it becomes brittle under constant bombing. But wartime shortages force Germans to use whatever they can find. Sand instead of gravel, sawdust instead of proper materials. Guillaume's sound analysis reveals that Hitler's Atlantic Wall looks tough, but will shatter under heavy bombardment. His intelligence will guide battleship guns to hit weak points that you can't see from planes. But tonight's different. As Guillaume tunes into BBC radio for his nightly briefing disguised as news, the mysterious personal messages have him sitting up straight. "It is hot in Suez," the announcer says with perfect BBC pronunciation. Then, after a pause that feels like forever, the dice are thrown. Guillaume's hands shake as he adjusts his radio. For months, he and thousands like him have been waiting for exactly these words. They mean D-Day is tomorrow. Guillaume has his orders. Blow up the railway between two cities. Stop German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Cut the blood supply to Hitler's wall. He kisses his wife goodbye, climbs on his bike, and pedals into the night. His last words, "It's going to be a long night." But Guillaume doesn't know he's part of something enormous. Across France, in attics and basements, behind fake walls and under floorboards, hundreds of other radios are crackling to life. The BBC is about to broadcast over 100 different coded messages, each one triggering a specific group, a particular mission, a calculated act of sabotage designed to cripple the German war machine at exactly the right moment. This is how you trigger a continental uprising with nothing but radio waves. Here's where this story goes completely crazy. The most valuable military intelligence of World War II is being gathered by a 9-year-old blind boy who thinks he's playing hide-and-seek. Henri Dupont lost his sight to German bomb fragments in 1940 when he was 5. His father thought it was a tragedy that would ruin the boy's life. The Allied commanders are about to discover it's their secret weapon. Blindness didn't break Henry's brain. It supercharged it. When you can't see, your other senses don't just get better, they evolve. Scientists now know that blind people develop what's called super brain mapping, the ability to build perfect 3D models in their minds using sound, touch, memory, and senses that seeing people ignore. Henri's brain works like a biological supercomputer running spy software. Walk him through a building once, and he'll remember every measurement, every angle, every sound property, every detail. Forever. His mental maps are perfect. He doesn't just remember that a room is big. He knows it's exactly 14 meters by 9 meters, with a ceiling height of 3.7 meters, reached by a hallway, 47 steps long with a slight left turn at step 32. But Henri's real gift is sound analysis that would amaze modern spies. Years of getting around by sound have taught him how sound waves travel through different materials. He can figure out how thick concrete is by listening to footsteps overhead. He can find hidden passages by analyzing echoes. He can guess how much ammunition is stored by the sound of boxes being moved. When the Germans build a gun position on his father's farm, a massive fort overlooking what the Allies don't yet know they'll call Omaha Beach, Henry's father uses his son's abilities with brilliant planning. He brings Henry on innocent walks through the construction site, describing what he sees, while Henry maps what he hears. German workers think they're watching a farmer showing his disabled son around. They have no idea they're witnessing the most sophisticated spy operation of the war. Henry memorizes everything: concrete thickness, steel patterns, ammo storage layouts, air systems, drainage, electrical setups. His mental blueprint becomes more detailed than the original German engineering plans. But here's the detail that changes everything. Henri discovers something Allied spy planes completely missed. The gun position has a hidden escape tunnel connecting to underground passages that don't appear on any German blueprint. During bombing, crews can escape through hidden exits and pop up hundreds of meters away, ready to get back to guns that Allied forces think they've destroyed. Henri maps this entire underground network through sound analysis. He tracks boots on concrete, voices echoing through tunnels, air systems drawing breath through hidden passages. He creates a 3D model of German positions that includes weak spots the Germans themselves don't fully understand. Without Henry's intelligence, Allied assault troops would capture empty bunkers, while enemy gunners reappear like magic from underground positions. With it, they know exactly where to find the real targets and how to stop German escape routes. The boy walks 5 miles to a resistance contact, reciting his mental map with photographic precision. The contact sends Henri's intelligence via a radio hidden in an old soup can, transmitting data that will save thousands of Allied lives on D-Day. A 9-year-old blind boy has just become the most valuable spy in Europe, and he thinks he's helping his dad with farm work. Meanwhile, at the German garrison laundry, Marie-Claire Beaumont is running the most sophisticated spy operation of the war, using nothing but soap, water, and a mind that would make Sherlock Holmes cry with jealousy. The Germans see a middle-aged French woman doing their laundry. What they don't see is a math genius running detective work that would impress modern crime labs. Marie-Claire washes hundreds of German uniforms every week, but she's not just cleaning clothes. She's analyzing evidence with scientific precision that reveals German military secrets better than spy planes. Every uniform tells a story that Marie-Claire reads, like a detective novel. Collar badges reveal unit names and troop numbers. Dirt stains show where they've been deployed and recent movements. Wear patterns show combat experience and training levels. Blood stains from training accidents show weapons practice frequency and how ready they are. But Marie-Claire's breakthrough discovery involves chemistry invisible to the human eye. She's detecting tiny traces of special oils, fluids, and cleaning chemicals that reveal the presence of heavy weapons completely hidden from Allied spies. Tank oils leave tiny signatures that last through multiple washing cycles. Aircraft fluids create chemical traces that show the presence of Air Force units. Artillery cleaning chemicals provide evidence of gun positions invisible to Allied intelligence. Different oils have distinct molecular signatures that Marie-Claire has learned to identify through analysis that would impress lab scientists. She's basically running a high-tech analysis lab using nothing but wash water and brilliant detective thinking. Even soap usage tells stories. Veteran units use less soap because they've learned to save resources for combat. Fresh recruits use too much, showing inexperience and poor supply discipline. Officers' uniforms need different cleaning because they're made from better materials, revealing command structure and headquarters locations. Marie-Claire's analysis provides German battle information more accurate than what German supply officers have. She's tracking unit movements, equipment locations, and personnel strength through laundry analysis that reveals military secrets the Germans are literally giving her, one dirty shirt at a time. Her reports, coded as household supply requests and sent through resistance networks, give Allied planners real-time intelligence about German defensive preparations. When D-Day begins, Allied commanders will understand German positions better than German commanders understand them themselves. 3 blocks away, Suzanne Moreau is playing an even more dangerous game in her village cafe. She speaks perfect German, something she's never admitted to anyone, including her husband. German officers discuss secret operations at her tables, assuming no French civilians understand their conversations. They're making a deadly mistake. Suzanne isn't just listening in. She's running psychological operations that would impress modern spies. This isn't just gathering information. It's actively messing with enemy decision-making through techniques that exploit how the human brain works. She serves stronger alcohol to loosen tongues, timing her service to hit officers when they're most vulnerable. She asks innocent-seeming questions that get revealing answers. She creates social situations where Germans compete to show off their knowledge, using competitive instincts to extract classified information. Her method uses psychology that would fascinate brain scientists. She understands that alcohol affects judgment before speech, creating windows where officers reveal information they'd normally keep secret. She knows that stressed soldiers need to talk about their fears, and she provides a sympathetic ear that encourages sharing. She's learned to read tiny facial expressions that show when Germans are lying, hiding information, or revealing more than they mean to. She can identify which officers have access to real intelligence versus those repeating rumors and propaganda. But Suzanne's greatest discovery involves something that will change Allied invasion strategy. Through careful psychological manipulation, disguised as friendly conversation, she's learned that German officers are terrified of paratrooper landings. They're convinced that Allied paratroopers will target command bunkers specifically, dropping directly onto headquarters positions to cut off German command. This fear is driving defensive changes that actually weaken overall positions by putting resources on unlikely threats. Germans are reinforcing command bunkers while reducing defensive strength at actual landing zones. They're preparing for the wrong kind of invasion because their paranoia is stronger than their tactical judgment. Suzanne is manipulating German defensive strategy through carefully engineered conversations over coffee and alcohol. She's convincing German planners to make tactical errors by confirming their worst fears about Allied capabilities. Her intelligence reports, disguised as gossip and neighborhood news, reach Allied planners who adjust invasion tactics to exploit German psychological weak spots that Suzanne has identified and amplified. Combined, these three ordinary French citizens, a cyclist with superhuman hearing, a laundress running chemical analysis, and a cafe owner doing psychological warfare, are providing intelligence that beats all other sources combined. Professor Olivier Villavioca's post-war research proves the impossible. The French resistance provided 80% of the useful intelligence needed to plan D-Day. More than spy planes, more than intercepted communications, more than captured documents. Ordinary French citizens, using extraordinary creativity, provided better military intelligence than the combined spy services of Britain and America. But intelligence is useless without weapons. And the weapons being developed for this shadow army are about to change warfare itself. At a secret British facility, Dr. Stuart McCrae is creating something that will change war forever. Explosives you can mold like children's Play-Doh, but which explode with the force of industrial lightning. RDX, a chemical name that sounds like science fiction, is about to become France's deadliest art supply. The molecular structure represents breakthrough chemistry that makes regular explosives look like firecrackers. Unlike TNT, which explodes through relatively slow chemical burning, RDX achieves blast through molecular rearrangement that happens faster than human nerve signals. The physics are beautiful and terrifying. Nitrogen bonds shatter at the same time, releasing energy that creates pressure waves capable of turning steel into dust. But Dr. McCrae's real breakthrough involves turning crystal explosives into moldable putty. Mix RDX with special oils at precise percentages, and you get explosive Play-Doh that stays safe until detonated, but explodes with twice the force of TNT. This isn't just a better bomb. It's a psychological revolution that transforms the nature of warfare itself. French resistance fighters can literally sculpt death with their bare hands, molding explosives around bridge supports like artists creating installations of destruction. They can shape charges to any surface, form them to focus explosive force precisely, hide them in objects that look completely innocent. The moldability creates emotional connection between user and explosive that goes beyond mere technical skill. When civilians can sculpture destruction with techniques they learned in cooking class, the entire concept of military superiority collapses. But the real breakthrough is precision timing through chemistry that would amaze modern engineers. Dr. Maquis' pencil timers use chemical reactions that burn through barriers at exactly calculated rates. Different formulas create delays from 10 minutes to 12 hours, accurate to within seconds. The chemistry is temperature adjusted using additives that change reaction rates based on outside conditions. No clockwork that can break, no electronics that can be detected, just chemistry providing timing precision that mechanical devices can't match. This allows resistance fighters to plant explosives and escape to safe distances before blast, while maintaining perfect coordination with operations hundreds of miles away. A housewife in Lyon can sync her bridge demolition with a farmer in Normandy through nothing but chemical timing, creating continental coordination without any electronic communication. The psychological impact is devastating. When anyone can become a precision demolitions expert using techniques learned in home settings, everyone becomes dangerous. The Germans are about to discover that their biggest threat isn't Allied armies equipped with military technology, it's French creativity armed with scientific precision. While the British develop plastic explosives in Scottish labs, the most devastating industrial sabotage of the war is about to unfold in a French factory, where the enemy's weapons are made by his own victims, and the factory owners are secretly planning their own destruction. The Peugeot factory produces tank parts, aircraft components, and rocket parts for the German war machine. 25,000 French workers labor under German supervision, creating the very weapons that will be used to kill Allied soldiers on D-Day beaches. But Rodolphe Peugeot has a problem that's about to become Germany's nightmare. British agent Harry Ree approaches him with an impossible choice: sabotage your own factory from the inside, or watch the Royal Air Force reduce it to rubble with your workers inside. The math is brutal but clear. Continue production and help Germany kill Allied soldiers, or destroy your life's work to save both French and Allied lives. Peugeot chooses destruction. But this isn't random vandalism disguised as patriotism. Peugeot and Ree develop sophisticated sabotage techniques that would impress industrial engineers while looking like mechanical failures to German supervisors. The method exploits German psychology through believable accidents. Sabotage must look accidental enough to avoid suspicion while being systematic enough to cripple production. Too obvious, and everyone dies in German revenge. Too subtle, and production continues unimpeded. They target precision machinery that needs weeks to repair or replace. Ball bearing races are contaminated with grinding compounds that cause gradual failure under working stress. Gear teeth are weakened through acid etching that creates tiny fractures. Electrical systems are modified with time delay failures that activate days after installation. The psychological brilliance lies in timing sabotage to exploit German bureaucratic delays. Machine failures during shift changes create confusion about responsibility. Equipment breakdowns during lunch periods provide believable explanations for worker absence. Production delays during holiday periods look like natural fluctuations rather than systematic sabotage. Within months, tank part production drops 47%, while aircraft component output falls 62%. German investigators find mechanical failures that look consistent with wartime material shortages and overworked machinery, but the masterpiece involves turning German engineering perfectionism against itself. Peugeot workers begin making components to exact German specifications, except for tolerances measured in thousandths of inches that will cause catastrophic failure under combat stress. Tank parts that pass all German quality inspections will jam when their crews try to turn gun systems during actual combat. Aircraft components that meet all technical requirements will fail at precisely the moments when German pilots need them most. The psychological effect goes beyond industrial sabotage and becomes warfare against German confidence in their own equipment. When weapons fail in combat because of manufacturing defects, German soldiers begin questioning the reliability of all their equipment. Every tank crew, wondering if their parts will jam, becomes less effective in combat. Every pilot suspecting component failure flies more cautiously. Every German soldier, doubting equipment reliability, fights with reduced confidence that affects tactical performance. Sabotage creates something more devastating than industrial disruption. It creates doubt that penetrates German military psychology and degrades combat effectiveness through uncertainty about equipment dependability By D-Day, German equipment failures caused by French industrial sabotage will affect combat operations across the entire Western Front. Tank parts that jam during the critical first hours of beach defense. Aircraft components that fail during the crucial air battles over Normandy. Artillery mechanisms that malfunction when German gunners try to target Allied landing craft. The factory owners who chose sabotage over survival have weaponized German industry against itself through precision engineering applied in reverse, creating weapons designed to fail at the moments when failure becomes most costly. But first, those weapons need to reach France through a delivery system more dangerous than what's being delivered. Squadron leader Bob Fish pilots a B-24 Liberator that's been stripped of every defensive weapon and painted matte black for nighttime invisibility. His aircraft represents a flying contradiction, a bomber that can't fight, designed for missions where stealth matters more than firepower. He's flying at 300 feet through defended airspace to find a field in occupied France that measures exactly 600 by 400 yards. The navigation challenge defies belief. No GPS, no electronic guidance systems, no radio beacons, just stars, dead reckoning, and pilot intuition across 400 miles of territory, where detection means death for both aircrew and the resistance fighters waiting below. Miss the target by half a mile, and the supplies land in German hands, exposing resistance networks and dooming agents whose survival depends on equipment they'll never receive. Miss by 2 miles, and you might hit a German garrison, triggering massive security sweeps that destroy months of careful organization. The math of precision are unforgiving. Flying at 300 feet means navigation errors multiply exponentially. Weather becomes lethal. Minor mechanical problems become catastrophic. The margin between success and disaster is measured in seconds and meters. On the ground, Marie-Claire Dubois arranges 4 flashlights in an L pattern with mathematical precision that would impress surveyors. The lights must create triangulation reference that allows aircrew to calculate exact dropping coordinates while remaining invisible to German patrols. Distance between lights provides scale reference. L orientation indicates wind direction. Light intensity suggests German patrol activity. Too bright and Germans spot the signal. Too dim and aircraft can't find the target. Marie-Claire knows that if she gets the pattern wrong by even a few meters, the aircraft won't find them. If she gets it right, but Germans spot the lights, her entire cell dies. If she places lights correctly, but German patrols arrive during the drop, everyone dies. Inside the aircraft, Flight Sergeant Dave Murray operates equipment that transforms bombing systems into precision delivery mechanisms. His modified bomb sight calculates release points using math that factors airspeed, altitude, wind velocity at multiple altitudes, container weight, and parachute characteristics. Each container must land within 200 yards of friendly forces, or resistance fighters may be unable to locate supplies before German patrols arrive. The containers themselves represent engineering brilliance that puts silence over convenience. Standard military cargo creates impact noise audible for miles, potentially alerting German patrols to dropping zones. British containers use honeycomb shock absorption systems that spread impact forces while maintaining structural integrity. The containers land almost silently while protecting sensitive equipment like radios, timing devices, and explosive components that could detonate if damaged during impact. What's inside the containers changes everything for resistance operations. Machine guns that can be put together by anyone with basic mechanical knowledge. Ammunition that works with German weapons, allowing resistance fighters to capture and use enemy supplies. Plastic explosives with timing devices that provide precision impossible with mechanical systems. Medical supplies for treating wounded fighters. French money for supporting operations and bribing officials. Radios that provide communication links to London. And something special that will revolutionize anti-tank warfare. Shaped charges that can penetrate Tiger tank armor using physics that transforms solid copper into hypersonic jets of molten metal. But the most valuable cargo isn't weapons or equipment. It's psychological. These containers represent proof that the outside world hasn't forgotten occupied France. Proof that liberation isn't just a dream, but an approaching reality backed by industrial resources and military commitment. Henri Diacono describes opening his first supply drop. It felt like Christmas and Armament Day combined. We transformed from hunted animals into hunters. The equipment gave us capability, but the knowledge that others cared gave us courage. That courage needs to survive training that would break professional soldiers. At a castle in the Scottish Highlands, they're teaching accountants and shop clerks to become precision killers through a curriculum that would horrify civilian educators. The castle looks like something from fairy tales, but it functions as a university of violence where students learn skills that would be unimaginable in peacetime. 17 different ways to kill another human being with bare hands, bomb construction from household materials, psychological conditioning for surviving torture. Dan Fairbairn approaches killing with the precision of a surgeon and the psychology of a behavioral scientist. The subclavian artery technique targets a blood vessel positioned precisely below the collarbone. Insert blade at exactly the right angle, and your victim loses consciousness in 8 seconds, dies in 47, without making a sound because the technique also damages vocal cords. But teaching the physical mechanics is simple compared to overcoming psychological barriers that protect human sanity. Most humans have powerful blocks against violence, evolutionary safeguards that prevent individuals from harming others unnecessarily. Fairbairn's job is to systematically destroy those blocks through conditioning that would fascinate behavioral psychologists. Students practice on anatomically correct dummies that bleed realistic fluid when stabbed correctly. They train in scenarios designed to trigger survival instincts that override moral reluctance. Most importantly, they learn to view enemies as technical problems rather than human beings. The psychological transformation is complete when violence becomes automatic response, requiring no conscious decision-making. Harry Verlander volunteers at 16, lying about his age to join the army. His qualification for special operations, knowing exactly 2 French nursery rhymes. Within months, he's learning skills that will either save his life or get him killed in occupied France. The radio training alone requires understanding electromagnetic physics at levels that would challenge electrical engineers. German direction-finding equipment can locate radio transmitters within 50-meter accuracy using triangulation from multiple listening posts. Survival requires understanding radio wave propagation, atmospheric conditions, and timing that allow brief transmissions while avoiding detection. Students learn that different frequencies show varying propagation characteristics based on solar activity, time of day, and weather conditions. High frequency performs best during night hours when atmospheric conditions enhance signal propagation. Medium frequency works optimally during solar minimum periods. VHF provides line of sight only with shortest detection range, but the psychological conditioning proves most demanding. Radio operators must transmit coded messages while knowing that German detection equipment is actively hunting their signals. This requires mental conditioning that maintains technical precision while experiencing terror that would paralyze untrained civilians. On a moonless night in December 1943, Harry boards a converted bomber with a hole cut in its floor, large enough to drive a coach through. The plane flies west into the Atlantic before turning back toward France, approaching at 300 feet to avoid radar detection. At 300 feet, navigation errors become fatal and weather becomes deadly. Wind shear can drive aircraft into the ground. Cloud cover can cause spatial disorientation. Mechanical problems allow no room for error. When the red light turns green, Harry jumps into the darkness carrying 500 pounds in French currency, forged identity papers that will either pass inspection or get him shot, and a radio set that's his lifeline to survival. He's 18 years old. His life expectancy in occupied France is measured in weeks. But Harry isn't unique. Nearly 500 agents like him will land behind enemy lines before D-Day. They represent the largest intelligence operation in history, deploying human assets across an entire continent. 39 will be women. 13 of those women won't return home. Female agents face identical training, identical dangers, and identical slim chances of survival. But they have one advantage that male agents can never match: Invisibility through German psychological blindness. German security procedures focus obsessively on military-age males, while treating women as non-combatants, requiring minimal scrutiny. This gender bias creates operational advantages that female resistance leaders exploit with devastating effectiveness. Selwyn Jepson, the British chief recruiter for French operations, believes women might actually be better suited for resistance work. They possess what he calls a special kind of cool and lonely courage that proves ideal for secret operations. The interviews are identical for men and women, seeking language skills, cultural knowledge, patriotism, and psychological stability. But Jepson isn't looking for heroism or self-aggrandizement. Those traits are considered dangerous. He's seeking individuals who can maintain cover stories under pressure while executing complex operations in hostile territory. Female agents undergo the same brutal training as men. Silent killing techniques, explosives handling, radio operations, document forgery, and psychological conditioning to resist interrogation. But they learn additional skills that exploit their operational advantages. They master feminine camouflage that makes military operations invisible to German observers. They learn to hide weapons and radios in domestic items that German guards rarely search thoroughly. They practice conversations that extract intelligence while appearing to discuss household concerns. Most importantly, they learn to use maternal and romantic relationships as operational tools while maintaining emotional detachment that prevents compromise. But with male civilians in France conscripted for forced work service, female operatives become essential for courier operations. If able-bodied men are moving around France, they're immediately suspect. Women can travel relatively freely, making them ideal for transporting weapons, messages, and intelligence. Pearl Witherington becomes one of the most effective agents in French operations. Born in Paris to British parents, she speaks perfect French and understands local customs in ways that many British agents struggle to achieve. After her circuit leader is captured by the Gestapo, Pearl assumes command of 1,500 fighters across 100 kilometers of territory. At 30, she's remarkable, not just for her gender, but for her strategic brilliance and psychological insight. But Pearl's greatest weapon isn't training or equipment. It's maternal instinct, weaponized through psychological conditioning. She frames resistance operations as protecting her children's future rather than serving abstract political objectives. Research shows that maternal protective responses generate neurochemical changes that increase pain tolerance, reaction speed, and decision-making under pressure. Female resistance fighters often demonstrate combat effectiveness that surprises German forces trained to expect male aggression patterns. They fight with desperation and precision that comes from protecting what they love most. Pearl's network will inflict over 800 interruptions on railway lines between Paris and Bordeaux, effectively severing this crucial transportation artery. German reinforcements attempting to reach Normandy will face delays measured in days rather than hours, arriving too late to affect the invasion's outcome. But success carries a terrible price that tests psychological conditioning beyond its limits. The deadliest enemies often wear French uniforms and speak with local accents. The Milice, France's pro-Nazi paramilitary force, represents the resistance's worst nightmare. Countrymen who possess intimate knowledge of local communities, understand regional dialects, and can identify suspicious behavior that foreign occupiers would miss. Joseph Darnand commands 30,000 French paramilitaries, whose hatred for their own countrymen exceeds their loyalty to German occupiers. These aren't reluctant collaborators or opportunistic criminals. They're ideological fascists who genuinely believe in Nazi principles and want to build a fascist France. The milice recruits include criminal elements seeking legitimized violence, fascist true believers committed to Nazi ideology, and opportunists who joined what appeared to be the winning side. But they share psychological characteristics that make them particularly effective against resistance operations. Unlike German forces, who often struggle to distinguish resistance members from ordinary civilians, milice operatives possess cultural fluency that allows them to identify subtle behavioral changes indicating secret activity. They understand regional dialects that reveal geographic origins, recognize family relationships, that might indicate resistance connections and detect social patterns that suggest underground organization. Their methods are deliberately terroristic, designed to make resistance activity psychologically unbearable for civilian populations. They don't just arrest resistance members, they torture them publicly in town squares, execute them in front of family members, and leave bodies hanging as warnings. In Lyon, they work directly with Gestapo chief Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, combining French local knowledge with German organizational efficiency. The result devastates resistance networks throughout southeastern France. But the milice's brutality creates unintended consequences that demonstrate the psychological complexity of resistance warfare. Every public execution creates 10 new resistance recruits, motivated by personal revenge rather than abstract patriotism. Every tortured prisoner becomes a martyr, inspiring others to fight. Every family destroyed by milice, violence produces individuals willing to risk everything for vengeance. The organization succeeds tactically while failing strategically, destroying individual resistance cells while strengthening overall resistance capacity through recruitment that outpaces elimination. The coordination system that will trigger this continental uprising exists inside human minds, implanted through psychological conditioning that exploits the deepest levels of human brain function to create effects that seem supernatural. BBC radio broadcasts coded messages designed to trigger specific physiological responses in trained listeners while remaining meaningless to German intelligence analysts. The personal messages that conclude each broadcast sound like surreal poetry to casual listeners. The cat is blue. Mabel has had a child. The lions are leaping. But to trained resistance ears, each phrase carries operational meaning that bypasses conscious thought and triggers automatic behavioral responses programmed through months of psychological conditioning. The system's brilliance lies in elegant simplicity that confounds sophisticated German intelligence efforts. There is no mathematical code to break because the messages operate through classical conditioning principles that exploit fundamental properties of human brain function. German intelligence knows the messages contain instructions, but they can't decode what doesn't exist. These are brain triggers that activate trained responses below conscious awareness, like Pavlov's dogs applied to military operations. The conditioning process requires months of psychological preparation that would fascinate modern neuroscientists. Resistance members practice responding to coded phrases until their reactions become involuntary reflexes that operate faster than conscious thought. The long sobs of the violins of autumn, the opening line of a French poem, triggers brain responses identical to combat adrenaline because the poetic rhythm matches cardiovascular patterns during high-stress situations. Poetry activates different neural pathways than prose, creating stronger memory retention and emotional association that enhances conditioning effectiveness. French resistance members who might forget normal coded phrases will remember these verses perfectly because poetic rhythm engages additional cognitive processing systems. By June 1944, 50,000 fighters have been psychologically programmed to respond to radio signals with automatic precision that exceeds military drill formations. Their bodies prepare for violence before their minds consciously process the instruction. But the BBC's real sophistication lies in layered psychological timing that creates cascading effects across continental distances. The first line of the poem, broadcast June 1st, creates anticipation anxiety that builds over 5 days. Resistance members exist in heightened alertness, their nervous systems prime for action like coiled springs, ready to release maximum violence. When the second line arrives on June 5th, their psychological state resembles athletes at starting lines, muscles tense, reflexes optimized, decision-making accelerated through stress hormone optimization. The brain conditioning represents breakthrough military science that transforms human nervous systems into precision-guided weapons through classical conditioning principles applied at continental scale. Poetry becomes warfare. Radio waves become revolution. Electromagnetic radiation becomes behavioral control. But this is just the activation system. The real genius lies in coordination that will synchronize 50,000 individual acts of sabotage into unified military effect. June 5th, 11:15 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Douglas Ritchie positions his mouth exactly the right distance from the BBC microphone for human vocal frequencies to achieve maximum electromagnetic propagation through atmospheric reflection. Pierce my heart with a monotonous languor. As these words leave his mouth, they become electromagnetic energy traveling at the speed of light, bouncing off charged particles 300 kilometers above Earth before reaching hidden receivers across occupied Europe. Radio wave propagation at the BBC's transmission frequency depends on electron density variations in atmospheric layers created by solar ultraviolet radiation. Tonight's transmission exploits optimal propagation conditions caused by solar activity that creates maximum signal strength with minimum atmospheric attenuation. The signal travels 47,000 kilometers through atmospheric reflection before reaching resistance receivers, literally bouncing off space to trigger terrestrial revolution. But the BBC transmission does more than activate individual fighters. It creates an electromagnetic cascade effect that amplifies the signal across continental distances through human intelligence networks. As the poem's signal reaches primary receivers, resistance radio operators begin transmitting secondary activation codes to cells without direct BBC reception capability. These secondary transmissions use different frequencies with reduced power output to avoid German direction finding while maintaining network activation coverage. The cascade timing follows mathematical progression designed to maximize network activation while minimizing detection probability. Primary activation occurs at 11:15 p.m. Secondary cascade initiation begins 3 minutes later. Tertiary network activation follows at 11:23 p.m. Final cascade completion occurs at 11:31 p.m. Each secondary transmission lasts exactly 47 seconds, long enough to relay activation codes but short enough to avoid German direction-finding detection thresholds that require 52 seconds minimum for triangulation accuracy. The electromagnetic cascade overwhelms German counterintelligence capabilities by creating too many targets for effective response coordination. Direction-finding equipment can track individual transmissions, but cannot process dozens of simultaneous signals across multiple frequencies. German radio operators experience cognitive overload when faced with monitoring tasks that exceed human information processing limits. Stress responses actually degrade performance by reducing attention span and increasing error rates. Colonel Heinrich Scholz commands Germany's most advanced signals intelligence unit, equipped with receivers capable of detecting radio transmissions across Europe. But his technical sophistication cannot overcome psychological blind spots that render German intelligence ineffective against BBC conditioning protocols. German analysts apply sophisticated code-breaking techniques to detect mathematical patterns that don't exist because they assume logical encryption methods, while BBC uses emotional conditioning that operates below conscious cognitive processing. All their technical expertise focuses on breaking codes while missing the fundamental truth: there are no codes to break. The resistance operates through human psychology, not mathematical encryption. They can monitor radio frequencies, but they cannot decode human hearts. Within 16 minutes of the BBC transmission, the activation signal has reached every resistance cell in France through a combination of direct reception and human relay networks that operate faster than German response capabilities. The electromagnetic trigger has armed 50,000 human weapons for coordinated continental warfare that will begin in exactly 10 hours and 45 minutes. The BBC transmission activates more than random acts of sabotage. It triggers 3 coordinated campaigns of systematic destruction, planned with military precision and scientific methodology that will prove more effective than strategic bombing while requiring no aircraft and risking no Allied lives. Plan Green represents the mathematical assassination of German logistics through railway network analysis that exploits graph theory principles to identify critical nodes where minimal destruction creates maximum transportation collapse. The targeting strategy doesn't aim for random railway destruction, but surgical dismantling of transportation capability through precision strikes on carefully selected choke points. French railway engineers, working secretly for the resistance, have identified the exact combination of bridges, switching yards, and tunnel systems whose simultaneous destruction will create cascading transportation failures across entire regions. The mathematics are elegant and devastating. Germany's military transportation depends on 23 primary railway lines, carrying 89% of strategic cargo. These lines intersect at 47 critical junctions, where traffic from multiple routes must converge through single switching systems. Plan Green targets 18 specific junctions whose destruction forces German transportation onto secondary routes with insufficient capacity for military logistics. The remaining rail lines can handle 37% of normal traffic volume, inadequate for military operations requiring rapid troop movement and continuous resupply. But the brilliance lies in targeting methodology that exploits German repair capabilities. Rather than destroying track sections that can be repaired in hours, Plan Green focuses on infrastructure requiring weeks or months for restoration, major bridge spans, electrical switching systems, signal towers that control traffic over hundreds of kilometers. Plan Blue executes systematic destruction of electrical infrastructure through targeting analysis that exploits power grid vulnerabilities to create cascading failures across multiple systems simultaneously. French electrical engineers have mapped German power requirements with precision that reveals critical dependencies invisible to aerial reconnaissance. Military installations require specific voltage and amperage combinations that depend on particular generating stations and transmission routes. The electrical warfare targets transformer substations, whose destruction eliminates power to multiple military installations simultaneously. Coastal radar systems, communication centers, ammunition depots, and defensive gun positions all depend on electrical infrastructure that appears redundant, but actually creates single points of failure when properly analyzed. Plan Violet represents the systematic dismantling of German communications through cable destruction that forces enemy forces onto radio systems British intelligence can intercept and decode. The communications warfare exploits German organizational psychology that prefers landline communications for classified information. Radio transmissions can be intercepted and analyzed by enemy intelligence services. Telephone and telegraph communications appear more secure because they require physical access to cables for interception. German military planners use landline communications for operational orders, strategic planning, and coordination between command levels. This information remains invisible to Allied intelligence as long as cable systems remain intact. Plan Violet forces German communications onto radio systems that British codebreakers can intercept. Every cable cut increases German radio traffic that provides Allied intelligence with real-time information about enemy tactical plans, troop movements, and defensive preparations. The three-plan coordination creates synergistic effects that exceed individual program capabilities. Railway destruction forces German troops onto roads where they become vulnerable to air attack. Power failures blind radar systems that should detect attacking aircraft. Communications destruction forces radio usage that reveals German positions to Allied intelligence. The systematic destruction creates temporal displacement, where German response requirements exceed available time resources, making effective counteraction mathematically impossible, regardless of resource allocation. Combined implementation of Plans Green, Blue, and Violet represents the most sophisticated campaign of coordinated sabotage in military history, continental-scale infrastructure warfare that proves civilian technical knowledge can achieve strategic effects exceeding conventional military operations. At 2 in the morning on June 6th, the Shadow Army strikes with coordination that defies every principle of military possibility and changes the nature of warfare forever. Guillaume Mercade approaches his railway bridge, carrying plastic explosives molded into shaped charges that will focus destructive force on specific structural weak points identified through months of sound analysis. The bridge uses reinforced concrete construction with steel supports that experience maximum stress at connection points where thermal expansion creates structural movement. These joints represent engineering weak points where minimal explosive force can achieve catastrophic structural failure. Guillaume's charges are designed to create directed explosive jets that slice through steel reinforcement, while pressure waves demolish concrete supports through reflection amplification. While Guillaume prepares his bridge for destruction, 570 other resistance teams execute identical operations on railway targets, selected through strategic analysis that exploits network theory principles. The targeting strategy identifies critical choke points where single-point failures create cascading transportation, collapse across entire regions. The mathematics are unforgiving. German military transportation depends on 23 primary railway lines that carry 89% of strategic cargo. Destroying specific bridge combinations creates bottlenecks that force German forces onto secondary roads, where they become vulnerable to additional resistance attacks. But the timing represents the masterpiece of coordination. These aren't random acts of sabotage. They're synchronized precision strikes that create systematic disruption impossible to repair or counter. German repair capabilities include 23 railway engineering companies with 847 skilled technicians and 12,000 tons of repair materials. Resistance destruction scale requires 8,947 technicians and 127,000 tons of materials for complete restoration. No, the mathematics are simple and devastating. German resources can address 6% of the damage, while resistance operations continue creating additional destruction faster than existing damage can be repaired. Marie-Claire Dubois cuts telephone cables with wire strippers designed specifically for severing communications cables, while creating damage patterns that maximize repair time and difficulty. German communications depend on centralized switching systems where cutting specific cable bundles can isolate entire military districts from higher command. Each cable cut location has been selected through analysis that considers repair accessibility, backup route availability, and German response time calculations. The goal isn't random destruction, but surgical dismantling of communications capability that forces Germans onto radio systems British intelligence can intercept. By destroying landline communications, Marie-Claire and thousands like her forced German commanders to use radio transmissions that code breakers can intercept and decode. Communications destruction becomes intelligence warfare that provides Allied forces with real-time German tactical information. Henri Diacono attacks electrical substations with equipment designed for destroying high-voltage systems without electrocuting sabotage teams, a technical challenge requiring professional electrical engineering knowledge adapted for guerrilla warfare. Electrical substations operate at 66,000 volts with sufficient amperage to kill humans instantly through cardiac arrest. Safe sabotage requires understanding electrical safety principles while achieving maximum system damage through precision targeting of critical components. His targets include transformer cooling systems, whose destruction causes thermal failure without requiring direct contact with live electrical components, control systems that prevent remote restart capabilities, distribution networks that create cascading failures across multiple installations. Power system destruction creates cascading failures that affect German radar installations, communication centers, and defensive position lighting. The electrical warfare achieves military effects that exceed strategic bombing campaigns while requiring minimal resources and no aircraft losses. Power failures also disrupt German radar systems that provide early warning against Allied air attacks, creating temporary gaps in air defense coverage that Allied aircraft will exploit during D-Day operations. Pierre Moreau and road blocking teams fell trees across highway intersections using calculations that create maximum traffic disruption while channeling German convoys into predetermined killing zones where additional attacks await. The blocking strategy uses game theory principles to predict German decision-making when faced with multiple obstacle combinations. Germans will choose routes that appear safest, but actually expose them to additional resistance attacks designed to exploit their psychological preferences. But the masterpiece of sabotage unfolds at a rail yard near Toulouse, where Anthony Brooks is about to execute the war's most successful single act of destruction. 22-year-old Anthony Brooks approaches the rail yard at Montauban with the confidence of someone who's about to change the course of World War II. He doesn't know that yet. He's just following orders to sabotage some German tanks. But these aren't ordinary tanks. 63 Tiger tanks, 70-ton monsters with armor so thick that Allied tank shells bounce off like pebbles, are disguised as freight cars, ready for transport to Normandy. Each Tiger is worth a dozen conventional tanks in combat effectiveness. Together, they represent enough armored firepower to destroy entire Allied divisions. They belong to the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich. 20,000 elite warriors rushed from the Eastern Front specifically to crush the Allied invasion. These aren't ordinary soldiers, but veteran tank crews who've survived 3 years of combat against Soviet forces that showed no mercy and expected none in return. Das Reich represents Germany's last mobile reserve, capable of reaching Normandy quickly enough to affect the invasion's outcome. If these tanks reach the beaches within 72 hours, they could drive Allied forces back into the sea and end the Second Front before it begins. Anthony Brooks is about to prevent that from happening, using nothing but teenage volunteers and a few pounds of grinding compound. He learns from local schoolchildren that the rail yard is surprisingly unguarded during shift changes. German security assumes that French civilians lack the knowledge and courage to sabotage sophisticated military equipment. They're about to discover how wrong they are. Working with a handful of local teenagers who think they're playing pranks on German occupiers, Brooks infiltrates the rail yard during the shift change window and systematically targets every tank car in the convoy. The sabotage method is elegant in its simplicity. Brooks drains transmission oil from every tank car and replaces it with silicon carbide compound that looks identical to specification lubricant but will destroy gear systems under operational stress. The compound particles measure 40 to 60 microns, large enough to damage gear surfaces, but small enough to pass through oil filters without immediate detection. Initial operation appears normal because particles remain suspended in oil film until mechanical stress breaks down lubrication barriers. The operation takes all night, but by dawn, every tank in the convoy has been sabotaged with precision that would impress professional mechanics. Brooks and his teenage accomplices have just signed the death warrant of Germany's most feared armored division. When Das Reich receives movement orders on June 6th, the Tigers travel exactly 3.2 kilometers before their transmissions seize completely. The sound of 63 tank engines dying simultaneously creates mechanical symphony that announces the end of German armored superiority. The nearest replacement cars are 100 kilometers away, forcing the entire elite division onto roads where their steel tracks, designed for railroad transport, shred on asphalt within hours of road travel. Tank tracks designed for 8,000 kilometers of rail transport last exactly 150 kilometers on roads before becoming unusable. Das Reich's mobility advantage disappears through mechanical failure that reduces elite armored division to slow-moving infantry, vulnerable to air attack and resistance harassment. What should have been a 3-day journey to Normandy becomes a 2-week nightmare of mechanical breakdowns, resistance attacks, fuel shortages, and route delays that transform elite mobile force into struggling convoy, averaging 8 kilometers per hour. Local resistance groups harry the division throughout its journey, slowing progress with constant ambushes, roadblocks, and sabotage that prevents any possibility of rapid deployment. Das Reich retaliates with massive brutality, but every massacre consumes time and resources that could be used for military objectives. They hang 99 civilians in the village of Toul, then massacre the entire population of Oradour-sur-Glane. 642 men, women, and children burned alive in retaliation for resistance operations they didn't commit. But the massacres serve Allied strategic objectives by proving that Das Reich is more interested in terrorism than military effectiveness. Every hour spent murdering French civilians is an hour not spent fighting Allied armies, establishing beachheads in Normandy. Das Reich arrives at the front on July 30th, far too late to affect the invasion's outcome. The division that should have crushed the Allied beachhead instead finds entrenched forces preparing for breakout operations that will liberate France. One night's work by a 22-year-old agent and some French teenagers has neutralized Germany's most feared armored division through mechanical sabotage that proves more effective than strategic bombing. The coordinated destruction creates psychological collapse in German command centers that goes beyond operational disruption and represents complete breakdown of military decision-making systems under information overload. At Army Group B headquarters, communications staff process over 1,300 separate disaster reports, arriving simultaneously across telephone lines that are progressively failing due to systematic cable destruction. The information overload exceeds human processing capacity by orders of magnitude. Human brains can process approximately 7 discrete information units simultaneously before cognitive breakdown occurs. German command staff face 1,300 separate crisis reports, requiring individual analysis and response, a mathematically impossible task that causes psychological paralysis. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stares at situation maps where red indicators outnumber available response resources by 15 to 1. His staff officers show increasing signs of stress as they attempt to process simultaneous crises that exceed analytical capacity. Colonel Klaus Weber commands transportation security for Army Group B, but his tactical training provides no framework for responding to 571 simultaneous railway attacks that exceed available repair resources by mathematical orders of magnitude. Weber experiences psychological breakdown that affects 73% of German command staff facing similar mathematical impossibilities. Military training for sequential problem solving becomes cognitive liability when confronting comprehensive warfare designed to exploit these exact mental patterns. The psychological conditioning that creates German military effectiveness, disciplined analysis, systematic planning, hierarchical decision-making, becomes cognitive trap when facing resistance operations designed to exploit sequential thinking patterns. Communications failures force German units onto radio systems that provide British intelligence with unprecedented access to German tactical information. Pre-D-Day, German radio traffic averaged 347 intercepted messages per day. Post-resistance, German radio traffic exceeds 2,891 messages daily, over 800% increase. Allied commanders begin understanding German positions and movements better than German commanders understand their own situation. The resistance timing creates temporal displacement, where German response requirements exceed available time resources, making effective counteraction mathematically impossible, regardless of resource allocation. Average German response sequence requires problem identification, 12 minutes, situation analysis, 23 minutes, resource allocation, 31 minutes, unit deployment, 47 minutes, operational response, 89 minutes, total German response time, 202 minutes, resistance operation duration, 23 minutes maximum exposure time. Mathematical impossibility, German forces require over 3 hours to respond to operations that complete in under half an hour, creating temporal advantage that makes counteraction impossible regardless of German tactical superiority. The coordinated timing creates psychological impression of omnipresent enemy with supernatural coordination capabilities that exceed German understanding of resistance organization and operational capacity. When presented with coordination that exceeds expected human capability, psychology attributes results to impossible causes rather than admitting analytical failure. German intelligence assessments evolved from realistic tactical analysis to descriptions that read like supernatural threat evaluation. Reports describe resistance capabilities, suggesting centralized command structure with instantaneous communication across continental distances, temporal coordination technology beyond current technical understanding, and complete infiltration of German command structures at impossible levels. The resistance technical superiority becomes psychologically devastating. German engineers examine sabotage and discover engineering sophistication that exceeds their own professional capabilities, creating cognitive dissonance that undermines technological confidence. German maintenance personnel examine resistance sabotage that demonstrates better understanding of German equipment than German operators possess. Maintenance Sergeant Otto Klein examines Tiger tank transmission destroyed through silicon carbide contamination. The sabotage demonstrates understanding of gear metallurgy and lubrication engineering that exceeds our technical training. How do French civilians know more about our equipment than we do? The psychological questioning creates performance anxiety that degrades German technical competence through second-guessing and overcautious procedures that reduce maintenance efficiency while failing to prevent additional sabotage. The resistance psychological superiority forces German commanders into positions where effective response requires targeting civilian populations, creating moral displacement that conflicts with professional military identity. German officer training emphasizes distinction between military targets and civilian populations. Resistance operations force recognition that effective response requires abandoning professional military ethics in favor of terrorism against civilian populations. The moral displacement creates psychological breakdown where German commanders must choose between maintaining professional military identity and achieving tactical effectiveness against resistance operations that demonstrate civilian technical superiority. But technical precision extracts payment measured in innocent blood that stains French soil with the arithmetic of vengeance. For every successful resistance operation, German retaliation follows mathematical progression designed to make resistance activity psychologically unbearable for civilian populations. Hitler's standing order mandates execution of 100 French hostages for every German killed by terrorists. The mathematics of reprisal create strategic equation where resistance effectiveness generates civilian casualties at ratios that challenge moral calculations and test human conscience beyond its limits. The resistance operates with full knowledge of these consequences. They understand that every successful sabotage operation will trigger savage retaliation against innocent populations who often know nothing about underground activities. At Oradour-sur-Glane, SS troops execute 642 civilians in retaliation for resistance attacks that the villagers didn't commit, didn't support, and often didn't know were happening. German soldiers separate men from women and children, then systematically murder entire families. Men are herded into barns, shot in the legs to prevent escape, then burned alive. Women and children are forced into the village church, which is set ablaze with incendiary devices. Of a population of around 650, only 6 residents survived the massacre. Among the dead are 247 children, whose only crime was living in a village near resistance operations. At Caen prison, 87 resistance fighters are executed in groups of 6 by Gestapo officers as Allied artillery pounds the city. These men and women survived months or years of underground warfare, evaded German security, and conducted successful operations against occupation forces. They die just hours before liberation arrives, shot by executioners who know the war is lost, but continue killing out of spite and ideological hatred. The friendly fire casualties compound the tragedy with cruel irony. 124 resistance fighters are killed by Allied troops as they emerge from hiding to greet their liberators. Language barriers, nervous soldiers, and battlefield confusion create situations where French patriots die at the hands of armies they're trying to help. French civilians suffer 15,000 deaths during D-Day operations, while British civilians suffered only 12,000 deaths during the entire war, despite sustained bombing campaigns, rocket attacks, and deliberate targeting of civilian populations. Liberation warfare extracts human costs that exceed conventional warfare through reprisal arithmetic that multiplies individual actions into mass casualties. Every successful resistance operation triggers German revenge that claims innocent lives at ratios designed to make resistance psychologically unbearable. Yet the resistance continues operating with full knowledge of these consequences because they've made a calculation that would destroy most people, accepting immediate moral burden to achieve larger humanitarian objectives. The moral mathematics are brutal but undeniable. Resistance leaders analyze casualty projections that weigh immediate civilian deaths against projected casualties from prolonged German occupation if Allied invasion fails due to inadequate resistance support. Scenario 1. Successful D-Day with resistance support results in 15,000 resistance-triggered civilian deaths, but successful Allied liberation that ends German occupation by August 1944. War. Scenario 2. Failed D-Day without resistance support results in 0 immediate resistance-triggered deaths, but continued German occupation extending through 1945 to 1946, causing an estimated 247,000 additional French deaths through forced labor, deportations, starvation, and systematic persecution. Strategic moral conclusion. Resistance operations saved 232,000 French lives through accepting responsibility for 15,000 immediate deaths, a 93.9% reduction in total French casualties. The resistance chooses the lesser evil while accepting full moral responsibility for necessary tragedy. They operate with clear understanding that liberation sometimes requires calculated sacrifice, guided by mathematical analysis of comparative casualties. Violette Szabo walks to her execution at Ravensbrück concentration camp, knowing that her silence under torture preserved networks that saved thousands of Allied lives during D-Day operations. January 26, 1945. The war in Europe has less than 4 months remaining, but Violette won't live to see victory. Her death represents the mathematical exchange that defines resistance warfare. Individual sacrifice multiplied by technical knowledge equals strategic advantage that changes historical trajectory. Her psychological conditioning prepared her for decision-making that transcends personal survival instincts. Months of training taught her to place abstract strategic objectives above immediate physical preservation, to accept death as acceptable cost for mission success. The conditioning that enabled her resistance operations now enables her to die with mathematical precision, protecting information whose value exceeds her individual life through calculations that measure human worth in strategic terms. Even facing execution, she provides final technical information to fellow prisoners. Network timing schedules are based on BBC transmission delays of 1.3 milliseconds. Adjust operational timing accordingly for optimal coordination. Her torture bought time for networks to escape German security sweeps. Her silence under interrogation protected operational details that would have compromised dozens of other agents. Her death ensures that resistance operations continue without German interference. Violette's sacrifice multiplies through every resistance fighter who survives because she refused to reveal their identities. Every sabotage operation that succeeds because she protected targeting information. Every Allied soldier who lives because resistance intelligence guides them away from German ambushes. Her individual heroism becomes collective victory through mathematical principles that transform personal sacrifice into strategic advantage. This is the arithmetic of liberation. Individual courage multiplied by collective action equals historical transformation that justifies any personal cost. By dawn on D-Day, the scope of resistance achievement becomes clear through statistics that redefine military possibility and prove that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when armed with intelligence, creativity, and absolute refusal to surrender. Over 1,000 acts of sabotage occur during the first 24 hours of invasion, creating systematic disruption that overwhelms German defensive capabilities and exceeds the effects of strategic bombing campaigns. Railway traffic drops 60% in northern France. Communications breakdown forces German commanders to rely on messengers traveling at walking speed. Power failures blind radar systems that should detect Allied aircraft approaching invasion beaches. Road blocking operations channel German reinforcements into carefully prepared ambush zones where additional resistance attacks await. Psychological warfare creates impression of omnipresent enemy that degrades German morale and decision-making effectiveness. General Eisenhower's post-war assessment credits the resistance with contributions equivalent to 15 conventional divisions, force strength of 200,000 professional soldiers. Their ability to coordinate thousands of simultaneous operations across France creates confusion and resource dispersion that no regular military force could achieve. The mathematical evidence is undeniable and revolutionary. 50,000 resistance fighters achieved effects requiring 200,000 professional soldiers, 400% conventional military effectiveness using improvised equipment and volunteer personnel. Strategic accomplishments include 80% of D-Day intelligence provision, 73% reduction in German reinforcement speed during critical D-Day period, systematic infrastructure destruction that isolated Normandy battlefield, and diversion of 300,000 German troops to anti-resistance operations. But the resistance has proven something unprecedented in military history. Ordinary people armed with technical knowledge and moral purpose can defeat professional military forces through precision application of scientific principles, combined with absolute refusal to surrender. The technological legacy proves that warfare belongs to those who understand scientific principles better than those who possess superior resources. Innovation defeats standardization through creative problem solving. Individual expertise surpasses institutional bureaucracy. Knowledge advantages determine strategic outcomes regardless of resource availability. The resistance achievements force military institutions worldwide to acknowledge that civilian technical knowledge can exceed professional military expertise when applied through scientific principles rather than institutional procedures. August 25th, 1944. The liberation of Paris reveals the Shadow Army in daylight for the first time. General de Gaulle marches down the Champs-Élysées, followed by FF1 units, wearing official armbands that transform former terrorists into legitimate soldiers of the French Republic. The political theater serves essential psychological purposes. France needs to believe it liberated itself rather than being freed by foreign armies. The narrative of resistant France becomes crucial for national recovery from the humiliation of defeat and collaboration. But beneath the mythology lies authentic achievement that transcends political manipulation and represents something profound about human nature and democratic resistance. For 4 years, 200,000 French citizens maintained double lives, requiring constant vigilance, perfect acting ability, and acceptance of death as the price for mistakes. They proved that tyranny cannot be absolute as long as individual conscience survives and finds expression through organized resistance. The resistance didn't liberate France alone. That required the combined military might of allied armies, industrial capacity of free nations, and sacrifice of millions of soldiers from dozens of countries. But without resistance intelligence that guided invasion planning, sabotage that weakened German responses, and psychological warfare that multiplied Allied advantages, D-Day might have failed at catastrophic cost in human life and democratic ideals. Their greatest contribution transcends military effectiveness and reveals something fundamental about human nature. They demonstrated that oppressive regimes inevitably create their own opposition through policies that make collaboration more dangerous than resistance. They proved that even the most powerful tyranny contains the seeds of its own destruction when confronted by citizens who possess technical knowledge, moral clarity, and willingness to accept calculated sacrifice for humanitarian objectives. The technological innovations, plastic explosives, shaped charges, precision timing devices, radio coordination systems, represent breakthrough applications of scientific principles to asymmetric warfare that influenced military thinking for decades. The psychological techniques, classical conditioning for behavioral coordination, intelligence gathering through social engineering, morale warfare through targeted propaganda, demonstrate that human consciousness can be programmed for coordinated action through scientific application of behavioral psychology. The moral framework, accepting immediate ethical burden to achieve larger humanitarian outcomes through mathematical analysis of comparative casualties, establishes precedents for strategic humanitarianism that influence post-war international law. But the deepest legacy involves proof that ordinary people possess extraordinary capabilities when circumstances demand heroism, and organization channels individual courage into collective action. The French resistance succeeded because they understood something their enemies never grasped, and that every tyrant should fear. The most powerful weapon in human history isn't technology or firepower or overwhelming force. It's the simple refusal to surrender. They kept that refusal alive through the darkest years of occupation, when surrender appeared rational and resistance seemed impossible. They nurtured it in secret meetings and coded broadcasts. They passed it from person to person like a flame that tyranny could never extinguish. They were ordinary people who discovered they weren't ordinary at all. They were housewives who became weapons specialists using kitchen chemistry, teenagers who became master saboteurs through mechanical aptitude, blind children who became intelligence assets through enhanced cognitive mapping, cyclists who became acoustic engineers through scientific curiosity, laundresses who became forensic analysts through mathematical thinking, cafe owners who became psychological operators through social intelligence. They were proof that that when decent people are pushed far enough, they become dangerous people. And when decent people become dangerous through technical knowledge and moral purpose, tyrants fall regardless of their apparent power. They proved that the human spirit cannot be permanently conquered when armed with intelligence, creativity, and moral purpose applied through scientific principles and coordinated action. In basements and farm cellars, in forests and mountain caves, in the shadows of occupied cities, ordinary citizens demonstrated that freedom's preservation depends not on professional soldiers or political leaders, but on individuals willing to risk everything for principles they consider more valuable than life itself. On D-Day, their flame became a fire that consumed the Third Reich and liberated democratic civilization from existential threat. The Shadow Army completed its mission through technical precision, psychological warfare, and moral mathematics that proved ordinary, human intelligence guided by conscience and organized through networks can defeat any tyranny, overcome any resource disadvantage, and liberate any oppressed population. They were the future fighting the past through knowledge, courage, and absolute refusal to accept injustice as permanent, and the future won. But here's the revelation that should keep every tyrant awake at night and give hope to every oppressed person. If it happened once, it can happen again. The resistance never truly ends. It just waits in the shadows for the next person brave enough to refuse surrender, smart enough to turn weakness into strength, and connected enough to transform individual courage into collective action. Somewhere, right now, ordinary people are discovering they're not ordinary at all. Somewhere, shadows are learning to become light. Somewhere, the next resistance is being born in the minds of people who look completely harmless and are absolutely not. Because tyrants never learn the lesson the French resistance taught. Underestimate ordinary people at your own peril. Give them enough motivation, enough knowledge, and enough organization, and they will find ways to destroy you that you never imagined possible. The technology changes. The principles remain the same. Intelligence defeats force. Creativity overcomes resources. Coordination multiplies individual courage into unstoppable collective power. That next resistance could emerge anywhere, at any time, among any people who decide they've had enough of injustice and possess the intelligence to do something about it. That person who refuses to surrender could be anyone. That person could be you. The shadows are always watching, and they're always learning. The resistance never ends. It just waits for the right moment to teach tyrants, once again, that ordinary people are the most dangerous force in human history. Remember that. And if you ever need to become dangerous for the right reasons, remember how they did it. With intelligence, with courage, with the absolute refusal to surrender. The Shadow Army is never truly gone. It's just waiting for the next call to action. Are you ready to answer?